2008 Paris Roubaix is the featured stage today here on Ultimate Tour. And no one loved Paris Roubaix more than George Hincapie. He raced it 17 times. We're honored now to have him as part of our show. Hey, George, thanks for making time for us.
My pleasure, Paul. It's good to be here.
You think Paris Roubaix, and what's the first thought that comes to mind?
Pain and suffering and stress, tons of stress. In fact, this morning I was thinking about, all my memories of Roubaix, and it's just the morning of the race, the amount of stress that you have going through your mind is just, it's unlike no other race on the calendar. There's a high chance that you're going to fall and get seriously hurt. For me in particular, there's a race that I wanted to win more than any other race on the calendar. So all of these emotions go through your head in the morning of Roubaix. And I was actually watching the race to try to remember some of the highlights of that year. And I even got a little bit stressed out watching it on the internet. So that's to show you how much the memories are super strong about that race.
So stress, risk, suffering, all understandable emotions attached to your memories there, but something hooked you. Something kept bringing you back and kept having it such a high priority for you. What was it about, or what did you like about it, in addition to all those emotions that were kind of angsty?
Well, for me, Paris-Roubaix just requires so much ability from a cyclist. It's not only about how strong you are, but you need to be really technically savvy on the bike. You need to be super efficient in the peloton. And even though there's no hills, in my opinion, it requires a complete cyclist to even finish that race, but not alone to finish it, to win Paris-Roubaix or finish on the podium. There's just so many elements of cycling that you need to have on point for that particular day that I think it's, in that sense, you need more than in most other races on the calendar.
Let's go back to the first time you raced it at age 20. It's amazing at that age, you weren't even legally an adult, but you're lining up in arguably the hardest race around. What do you remember about being 20, lined up against these grown men going into that kind of race?
Oh, that year I was super excited. I mean, it was snowing outside, and it was freezing cold, and I lined up with a pair of shorts and a long sleeve jersey. I didn't care. I was just like, my dream had come true. I'm starting Paris-Roubaix. In my mind, I didn't care it was snowing. I didn't care that it was going to be super hard. And I was just full of excitement, maybe a little bit naive. I wasn't sure what to expect. And it was, one of the most painful days of my career. And I finished the race. Only I think that year about 40 people finished out of 220 riders. It was one of those epic, muddy Paris-Roubaix that are super, super tough. But I remember I crawled into the finish line, 15 or 20 minutes behind the first place guy. And I said, I'm coming back to this race every year, and I want to, make this one of my goals of professional cycling.
Okay, so clearly you prioritized it. You wanted to come back. Did you also have a feeling when you got off your bike that day when you're 20, I'm going to come back and I can win this thing?
Yeah, I knew that I was built for that type of riding. And, I think just growing up in New York City and racing my bike in Central Park and Prospect Park, there's a lot of chaos that's involved in that sort of cycling. And I feel like it really kind of tuned my skills for races like Paris-Roubaix and the Tour of Flanders. There's just so much going on, whether it's the pans or the road furniture, roundabouts, crashes. I just think I had that heightened sense of awareness on the bike that races like Paris-Roubaix require to be successful.
There aren't many cobbles, though, at Central Park and around New York City. So how does one get good at not only surviving, but being successful on the cobbles?
Well, that's a great question, because I've been asked that question many times. And it's just, you cannot train that here in the U.S. There's really no roads like that that you can ride on and get used to. It's just a question of just feeling natural on once you first ride them and knowing how to pick the lines and being always super focused on what's coming up ahead. But you can't train that as an aspiring cyclist here in the United States. You just got to go there and either love it or hate it.
Is it fair to say you have a love-hate relationship with it, or you had that kind of relationship while you were riding?
Absolutely. I mean, on the good days, you can feel like you're floating on the cobbles. And on the bad days, every little bump, you feel it from your fingertips to your elbows, everywhere. Everything hurts. So there's a ton of different emotions and feelings that go on throughout that race.
But something clicked with you as you kind of piled up race after race, started when you're 20. Your first 5 times, 29th was your highest finish. to go along with all those emotions that you were gathering at the start line and throughout. But the next 5 that you raced, all in the top 10. What did you figure out there after those first 5 races?
Well, Roubaix, it's about experience. It's about saving energy. It's about, not getting too caught up in the attacks in the early part of the race and just trying to just find your place in the peloton where every little bit of energy you can save counts twice as much at the end of a race like Paris Roubaix. So just about learning the race, knowing when to really focus on positioning, when it didn't really matter. And I got to know the race really, really well, even though it was so far away from where I lived in Europe and where I lived in the United States. I knew every section like the back of my hand. I knew which sections were important to be in the front. I knew if the wind was coming a particular way, one section would be more important than another. So it's just a matter of learning the race more and getting more experience.
In between each race, did you ever go over once or twice just to ride the course and remember what it's like and to help you for the next one?
Yeah, we would ride. We would every year after like Tour of Flanders, we'd go there a few days later, which was the week before Roubaix, and we'd do a recon ride like Wednesday or Thursday, just to kind of familiarize ourselves with the important sections of the race. So it's just, you just can never get enough information in that race, and you can never, stop learning as well. So it was always just a matter of like, it depends on what was going on in the weather the weeks leading up to the race as well. It could be super muddy, it could be super dry and dusty. All those factors come into play when the race day comes in.
Someone who doesn't have any experience at that race, but was thinking about going over to ride it, say a younger rider right now, in addition to getting into, well, once you do it a few times, you're going to learn this or you're going to learn that. Before he had any experience, what's the number one skill you would say he had to have for his first time?
A ton of endurance. I mean, you got to be able to handle those 7-hour days, and not only handle it, but have the energy and the power left at the end to be able to stay with those top guys. I mean, it's pro cycling, as we all know, is one of the hardest sports in the world. And but there's definitely a sort of a different type of rider that can perform after 5 hours. And these races like Paris Roubaix, Tour of Flanders, all the big World Cup races are 7 hours plus. So it's just a completely sort of different type of rider that can perform after 6.5 hours. You see a big difference in the riders who's able to continue to perform.
Well, Tom Boonen would end up being the guy on this day. He won 4 times, and this would be one of them. We'll talk more about him after the stage, but he's one of your former teammates. So as we watch him succeed here throughout this show, what's something we ought to know about him?
Tom was one of those guys. He was my teammate his first year pro, and he was just, full of confidence, just very determined. Really he had no fear. You can tell early on that he was going to be special. Even at training camp, you go to a training camp as a first year pro, you kind of just, you're just very quiet. You're just trying to learn the ropes. But he was the opposite. I mean, he would go out there and hammer us all on the first couple of rides, and really wanted to make a point early on in his career, and he sure did.
It's amazing how no matter the sport, someone who's successful professionally at a young age has that sense of they don't care that they're young. Their confidence is the number one thing. Absolutely.
And that continued throughout his career. I mean, he was always had that confidence. Great guy, super fun to be around, great teammate, but he was intense. And when it was time for a race and when the action was going down, like we're not getting in his way.
Were you always aware of where he was on the course in this race?
Oh yeah, I mean, races like that, there's always only a handful of guys that pretty much always make the selection when the race is coming down to the most important part of the race, whether it's the Arenberg Forest or the Carrefour de l'Arbre, or it's a very tough positioning, but you always run into the same people. And even though you might not be following them, when you enter the section, you just happen to be right next to them.